And one of the teams that we want to talk about is VfB Stuttgart, and they are visiting Dortmund. Stuttgart dispatched of Augsburg. If you want to have more details on the cup game and how they did there, we broke that down midweek in one of the bonus shows. They now are heading to the Signal Iduna Park, and this is I think, a headline match simply because this is Niko Kovac's first game in charge. We'll see whether the new players will be lining up for this one as well. But it's all kind of overshadowed, isn't it, by Niko Kovac and what he's going to do with this team and how he's going to line up. There's been some word that Emre Can, for example, is going to play centre back. That's a role that he has played in the past. I'm just looking at the projected lineups. None of the new guys are going to be starting, but they're going to be probably on the bench, and that's Chukwuemeka Emeka and Svensson are the two new ones, right? I guess there's going to be a ton of attention on this game just because of that. It is going to be the main headline match. It's not necessarily because of Dortmund's form, although they have to win this, considering where Stuttgart are in the standings. They're ahead of them, right? They are in around that fourth place in Champions League spot, and they are one of the teams that they have to eventually leapfrog to get to that top four, back to the top four. So this is a must-win game as well against a direct competitor. But I guess I think we're just eagerly anticipating and waiting to see what Kovac has done in his week in charge at Dortmund and how it's all going to look.
Yeah, it's game time, isn't it? It's opening night on Broadway, whatever expression you want to use. We've talked a lot about Kovac. Has kind of been waiting for it to go over the line for most of January, and we're now here in the first game in which he's in charge, and it's against a very good Stuttgart side. Part of me kind of thinks this might be a game that really suits Dortmund, just because they obviously didn't have a midweek game. Kovac had the full week to train with his new squad. Obviously the new players arrived on Monday, which means they got a chance to train with the team, even if, as you said, they won't be starting the game. But, they still have that extra depth on the bench, which they haven't really had at all this season. And, things like that can have a huge impact in terms of not only what they can offer the team, but also that can really galvanise the players in those positions to play better. Someone like Benzema or Marcel Sabitzer or, whoever else in midfield. These guys now know that if they don't play well enough, there's these two new young and good players who are ready to kind of step in. And of course, there's a new head coach who everyone has to impress if they want to stay in the starting 11. So I don't want to go ahead and say like Dortmund are going to have some sort of new manager bounce, because to me it's a bit of a myth, that idea. But he's kind of talked the right talk. He said he wants to kind of do things very straightforward. He wants to keep it simple. Very typical Kovac, where I think we'll probably see them be very cold, not very cold, very tight, very defensive, very kind of regimented, and they'll probably try to pick Stuttgart off. And I think they might do quite well here, because, Stuttgart, in that game against Augsburg, they controlled the match. And as we said on the bonus show, they did a pretty professional job of beating Augsburg in what could have been a potential banana skin, but it wasn't the most kind of remarkable attacking display from Stuttgart. And if we take a look at their away form this season as well, it has kind of suggested that they have struggled on the road. They've only picked up 12 points from 9 games. They've only scored 12 goals in 9 games. That's just 3 wins from 9 games as well. So they haven't been fantastic so far on the road. They obviously lost recently to Mainz as well. And I just kind of think that this might be a performance or a fixture that's lining up quite well for Dortmund. I also think, having watched Dortmund's last home game where they drew that game 2-2 with Werder Bremen, it felt like a lifetime ago. And obviously there's a new head coach there. Players have changed as well, and you might have a different tactic, different setup. But I feel like on the whole, the Dortmund squad have actually reacted quite well to Nuri Sahin's sacking. You can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but either because they're, trying to fight for their own skin, or because they feel an obligation to prove themselves, I feel like on the whole, the performances have been better. Should they have thrown away a 2-goal lead against Werder Bremen? No, they should have, but they were also, for about 80 minutes, down to 10 men. and eventually they just got tired. And I actually thought they controlled that game for the most part. It wasn't until I think Bittencourt scored like a wonder goal, like 10, 15 minutes from the match, that things began to kind of wobble for them. And then Marvin Duksch does what he tends to do, which is just going to score really impressive goals in the box. So I think Dortmund could take a lot of confidence from that game, even though on paper it was a 2-2 draw against, a mid-table club. And if they can put in a similar performance without getting anyone sent off, then they might be in pretty good stead against Stuttgart.
Yeah, I think the midweek game is going to play a significant role here. Niko Kovac doesn't have a Dortmund past, but his brother Robert Kovac, who is his eternal assistant coach, wherever Niko goes, Robert goes too. I actually always think it's really fascinating that of the two, Niko is the one that's more prominent, even though it was actually Robert who probably had the better footballing career. Way better footballing career. Robert Kovac was an outstanding centre-back for Leverkusen, Hamburg, Bayern, right? And then for 2 years at Dortmund. And I think, he played at, I think his last season was the first season under Klopp, if I'm not mistaken. Either way, it's interesting that, that's even this coaching, even though Kovac is not a Dortmund guy, they still managed to get a Dortmund guy into Dortmund. Somehow they always managed to do that. I thought, it kind of put a little smile on my face, although I don't think it's quite the same as it is with some of the other coaching decisions that they made.
Maybe Vasca thought he was speaking to Robert Kovac when he appointed Niko.
That's why they made the trip to Salzburg twice, right? No, jokes aside, I think that it is kind of interesting though that when you talked about some of the changes that have been made, 2 new players come in, right? Svensson and Chukwuemeka. We talked about that on the transfer show. The one that didn't work out was Ryan Cherki, and you read in Kickers the kicker issue that came out this morning, German time, that they wonder whether there's going to be consequences because a deal was in place, and then it got spectacularly torpedoed by Olympique Lyon's American owner Textor. Olympique Lyon is a basket case in itself. We won't go into details here. On the continent, with Andy Brassel, who's a friend of the show, did a really good show on Olympique Lyon. If you want to listen to that, I can highly recommend that. It is a complicated situation. Cherki essentially didn't have an exit clause, but he had an agreement with the ownership that he could leave for a certain amount of money. Dortmund offered that money, and then Lyon publicly shut that down. And I read now that there was the plane already chartered that was going to take Cherki to Dortmund, and everything was in place. And the question that was asked whether there is going to be personal consequences because they didn't get their attacking player across the line that they desperately need. And we know the answer for that now, right? Sven Mislintat fired today. He has to leave Borussia Dortmund. The squad planner, I think, is his best way to describe him. One of the many people in charge of building this team. I think I saw that and I understand that he's a really complicated person. His track record shows this too. At Ajax, it didn't quite work out. Before that, in Stuttgart, towards the end of his time in Stuttgart, there were personal problems with him and other people at the club. But I also need to point out that he built the core of that Stuttgart team, right? He was a big part of putting the players of the squad together that eventually had the success that they did. And then obviously previously before that, he was at Arsenal and also, at Dortmund, where he did find many talented players, including a young Alexander Isak, who Thomas Tuchel was not impressed with, and has, everyone who knows Alexander Isak and the career he has now. Sven Mislintat was one of the first guys to find him. And so I looked at this today and I was thinking to myself, I know he's really tough and he's not an easy person to work with, but he's probably also the one, if you want to be a club that wants to find and develop talent and, improve Dortmund's situation from where it is today, maybe he would have been the one that you should have gone forward with rather than the other 3 that are currently in charge.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a fair way to look at it. He obviously has a track record that speaks for itself, but that's in more ways than one. This is now like the 3rd or 4th job he's had, where he's kind of left quite quickly under kind of cloud of disappointment. Some cases worse than that. It's a weird one. I mean, from what I can tell from the reporting, it seems as though he was overstepping the mark quite a lot at Dortmund, which is just probably a classic Sven Mislintat thing to do. He's a very hands-on, very pragmatic person. But it maybe meant that the kind of hierarchy of who did what was maybe getting quite confusing. And, we were saying just before we start recording that, you've got Saber there, you got Kale, you've got Ricken, you got obviously Mislintat, and technically you got Sebastian Kale as well. And if you were to lay out all of their job descriptions, it would just be this really convoluted Venn diagram. And yeah, of course, like a big institution like Dortmund does need to have a lot of department heads doing a lot of different things, but I think in a way it did kind of characterize the kind of, how convoluted Dortmund had become and how they kept kind of tripping over their own shoelaces in a way. And, Sven Mislintat is going out and scouting players and talking up players or chatting with agents and trying to get them, and trying to get Dortmund to sign these guys. And it's technically Sebastian Kale's job to sit down with a club to sign someone. And then the club's like, well, we've been speaking to Sven Mislintat for the last 6 months and he said this, this, and this. By the way, I'm completely speculating there. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just speculating. But if it is something along those lines, then you can understand why they had to kind of draw a line under it and figure out what to do there.
Yeah.
Maybe Mislintat's the guy with the best track record there, and maybe he's the one that should be kept on. But we'll see what happens. They obviously gave Sebastian Kale a contract extension not long ago. I think he has a deal till 2027 right now. So they obviously trust him and they put their faith in him before Mislintat came back. So I guess it would have had to take something quite impressive for them to kind of move Kale on. But yeah, it just kind of sums up Dortmund this season. They're just a kind of one kind of circus show to the next. And hopefully with Kovac coming in, they can turn around and say, draw a line under the Mislintat thing and just kind of move forward with a bit more of a streamlined hierarchy at the club. So when the next transfer window comes along, they're not sitting doing nothing for it and then quickly dashing to try and sign players on deadline day again.
Yeah. He is hoping that they can do exactly that. I mean, this game on Saturday against Stuttgart is going to be very interesting. They have lost the last 3 games against VfB. Stefan, this is a team that they do not like playing against. And that's the longest that Dortmund have not beaten a team. So this is the context here, right? Like, we're talking about a club that usually wins their games and hasn't done that very much this year. So, when there's a team like Stuttgart that have been unbeaten or have been unbeaten against or have beaten Dortmund 3 times in a row, that is noteworthy. And so, I think I personally think it's going to be a really big test for Kovac. And I think it's going to be kind of telling what he wants to do. He said in his press conference that he wants to play attacking football. But I think he also put a caveat on it eventually. So, and that's I think what's telling here. I think the most important thing for Dortmund in this game is going to be 3 points. Like, nothing else will matter, right? And I personally think the only way you're going to get 3 points, if you play attacking football against the Stuttgart team, I think they will pick you off.
Yeah, no, you're probably right. I mean, I don't know. You're absolutely right. Stuttgart have kind of had the measure of Dortmund recently, but I do kind of feel like the schedule is kind of playing in Dortmund's favour here. And if there's one thing that's really kind of mucked up Stuttgart this season, is they have struggled to kind of deal with, one competition after the next. We talked about this on the bonus show in midweek, actually, where we talked about how Dennis Undav and his return has had to be really tapered and how he starts one game and is rested and starts one game and is rested. And, he might have to be rested for this game because he played the full 90 minutes against Augsburg. So I think when Stuttgart are at full strength and they've got, everyone's match fit and Sebastian Hoeneß has time to kind of prepare his team, then I think they can beat anyone. But I think when the fixture list is coming thick and fast like this and they're going from one competition to the next and God knows Stuttgart have so many injuries they have to contend with right now, then I think that's when they do kind of become a little harder to predict. And I just think a really solid home performance from Dortmund, like we saw in the Werder Bremen game for the most part, might be enough for them to actually win this game.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think this is such an intriguing fixture because it's between two teams with, I think we can put Stuttgart back into the category of clubs that have Champions League aspirations. Ahead of the season, they set ninth. But I think this season, despite everything, at least the domestic season has gone a lot better than people thought, right? They're also now in the semifinal of the German Cup. I mean, this is actually kind of under the radar, gone a lot better than I think they thought too. And so, I think they are a club now with Champions League aspiration. And then Dortmund is a club that is now in the situation where they have to catch them. And I think that makes for a really intriguing matchup.